All right, hello everybody. So I recorded this once, and then I was pretty close to done with this build, and then I pushed over 900 corruption, and I made a couple changes, and now I have to re-record the whole thing. So let's talk about this build. Right, this is a interesting build. It's a Vengeance Paladin, and I don't think I've seen any Vengeance Paladins before, at least in this context. I've seen Dread's video where he did some that was bleed based, and that seemed pretty strong. But what I'm doing is a little bit different, right? I'm playing a fire-based Vengeance Paladin. So I set out with the goal to play a fire crit skill because I hadn't played a fire crit skill that was melee inside of Paladin. So I wanted to try it out, make healing hands like fully utilized, because I always feel like whenever I play healing hands, I'm utilizing the portion of it that's doing less void damage taken and less necrotic damage taken, and maybe that's invulnerable dash as well. And it's just always that good utility skill that always exists, but I'm never utilizing the damage, right? It has a modifier on Bane of Evil that gives spell damage per 20% increased healing effectiveness. So if I can stack healing effectiveness, I can get a ton of spell damage, which I can convert to melee damage from Seraph's Blade, right? And then it also gives me plus 1% more damage for the skill per level of specialized buff skill. So considering the fact that I want to take Symbols of Hope and Holy Aura already, that's at least a 20% per, right? So I'm getting 42% more damage. So I really wanted to play around with a build that was like a fire crit based build. And I was thinking it was going to be a Warpath. And then as I started getting into it, turns out I ended up playing Vengeance. Vengeance was pretty fun. Vengeance is a skill with like, I think 12 different more multipliers on the skill tree, depending on where you go. 2 of them are for Void. 1 of them is for Iron Blades. So those aside, there's like 8 different more multipliers that this build can use. And I'm using a lot of them. So it's a very point intensive tree. There's a ton of things that you want to get from it. The key is Flaming Sword, which turns our Vengeance into fire. And it also gives us Fire Res Shred, because the node before, Smelter's Vengeance, gives us physical Res Shred, and this converts it. So I have my Fire Res Shred capped. I have my fire damage converted. So I'm now doing a physical fire skill. And then with Fiery Frenzy, I'm getting Frenzy as well to increase my attack speed and up to 60% more damage, scaling with my Ignites, which I easily can cap, right? So I'm getting fire damage, I'm getting frenzy, I'm getting more multipliers, all just from these points over here. And then with rapid strikes, I'm getting melee attack speed, which is huge. And then I'm getting a little bit of perfect riposte, giving me crit chance, but I need a lot more to make this build work. But as you can see, this build has everything. Bolster is making us hella tanky. It's giving us 26% less damage taken if we've used Vengeance in the past 2 seconds, which we are always using, right? Because it's our damage skill. So we always have less damage taken. Then Riposte is an additional 25% less damage taken. And it strikes a nearby enemy, right? Added damage effectiveness on Vengeance is 125%. And for Riposte, it's 150%. So Riposte is a good amount of damage too if you get hit. But it's conditional on being hit, right? So you get 1 Riposte per Vengeance. And I can up that to 2 with double Riposte, which is pretty powerful. It gives me more damage, right? But it comes at the cost of Riposte. Excuse me, Riposte reduces less damage, right? So it goes from 25% damage reduction to 18, so that's a 7% damage reduction loss. But considering the fact that I'm already pretty tanky and I'm getting that 26% from Bolster and then the 50% increased armor from Bolster as well, I don't really need it. There is also Dark Duelist, which I just don't have the points for, which gives me global more multi, and then Zealot's Technique, which gives me another Riposte, but if I had 5 extra points, I would go into there. Otherwise, I just don't have it. Vengeful Fighter is giving me 30% more damage, doubled if I've blocked or parried recently. And then Executioner is giving me 40% more damage, doubled against low health. So when an enemy gets low health and I start riposting, I can do a ton of damage, right? And then finally, I put the remainder of my 3 points inside of Gladiator's Arsenal. This only applies to riposte because I get 45% more riposte damage with the mace, which is pretty good. And then I don't have Iron Blade, so I don't get anything for the sword. But it's a lot, right? Just for riposte, it's a lot. You could convince me to put that into Executioner and Disarming. Those would be also pretty good. And I would cap those out. That would be an additional, 30% more damage just overall. I just wanted to try it out. I wasn't sure how much of my damage was coming from riposte, which does more damage because everything that says more damage to Vengeance applies to riposte as well, but stuff like Molten Riposte only applies to riposte because it's only for the riposte fire damage and riposte ignite chance. So there you go. The more you know. So that's a Vengeance thoroughly explained. Everything else I'm going to go through pretty quickly just because it's like the normal stuff, right? So we're using Abyssal Echoes in order to get Embrace of the Darkness, which is a buff that gives us 20% attack speed and 20% more damage versus Blind, which we are also getting from Myopia. So whenever we use it, we apply Blind, and then we're getting some Shred. Otherwise, we don't really care about it. Holy Aura, if it says Fire Pen or increased fire damage, we're taking it. Otherwise, we want the melee attack speed, the crit chance, the crit multi, and then Flame Burst is kind of a free damage, but I don't think the points are actually needed over there. You can move it back into Firestorm or even into things like Shelter from the Storm for the Endurance, right? Because the Endurance is pretty powerful, or into Purification for the Poison Res, which I think I will do. So in the planner that you will see below and in the guide that you see below, I will actually have it inside of Purification just because I think that Poison Resist will cap us. So important. Healing Hands, I've kind of already explained it. We're doing Seraph's Blade to make it a fire melee hit, Cleric's Hammer to make it apply on our Vengeance, and then Rise Chariot and Sunshroud to give us an Immortal Dash, Halted Scourge and Turn Undead to reduce Void and Necro damage, and then a couple of damage buffs and mana reduction buffs. So that is it. And then Symbols of Hope, we're taking Tetragram and Polygram in order to get more maximum symbols, and then each symbol is giving us a ton of damage granted. So like increased damage and crit chance and some base damage. So that's pretty much it for symbols. It's just a generic damage buff for us. Pretty solid overall. So that is the skills. Going through the items, Renegade's Will is incredibly powerful for this build, right? We're running a dual wielding build. We're getting the 20% melee attack speed from dual wielding. Renegade's Will easily comes with 3 LP and sometimes comes with 4 LP, so you can farm that up pretty easily. It gives up to 53% increased melee attack speed, which is huge. 5 all attributes, 5 increased move speed, up to 5 in Vengeance minus +4, and up to 53% more damage with Vengeance. So, sorry, more hit damage, specifically hit damage. So it's very powerful. I have a tier 7 melee attack speed and tier 6 increased melee damage, which is solid. Those two you want for sure. And then chance to shred armor is always good as a suffix. So that's my Mace's Will, or sorry, Renegade's Will. You can also put melee attack speed there if you want. I like the increased melee damage because getting increase on our build is a little bit hard. Eye of Reen, we have it with melee damage and it comes with 40 melee fire damage. I slammed a tier 6 melee critical strike chance on there. I also have a tier 7 melee attack speed one. Depending on what version of the build you're running, in the build guide I'll have multiple versions. You will want a different Eye of Reen, so this changes. But this gives us, per stack of Reen's Ire, it gives us up to 105% melee crit multi. So that's a lot of damage, right? We're also running True Sight as our primordial. You can run Nihilus and then a tier 8 primordial affix. That is a good alternative, but I think True Sight is the second best. It's giving us a good amount of crit strike avoid, and it's also giving us a ton of crit multi with the deadly strikes. So we want to cap our crit chance up to 140% to utilize this. I also have a 2 LP, and it gives us 10% less damage over time taken, which is huge, right? I then have a Peak of the Mountain in order to supplement. You want a +4 to Vengeance, so a tier 7 to Vengeance. If you're running the non-True Sight version, you want a tier 8 to Vengeance, just for the points and increased melee damage. And then you'll run this as an Exalted. You won't run a Peak of the Mountain, and then you can run Nihilus instead. So that's the key of this, right? Peak of the Mountain is capping our crit for the True Sight Glass, but otherwise you want to run an Exalted Relic. Okay, Shattered Rolls, it gives us less damage taken, which is solid, but we're really running it for the 5% critical strike chance and the +1 to all skills, because we love plus skills. We like the increased effective frenzy, that's nice to have, but the 5% crit chance is what we really care about. If you're not running this, just run any relic with tier 7 crit multi, and then maybe like increased fire damage or strength and whatever suffixes you need. That's the key to this relic, right? After that, we are running Immortal Vice, but there are alternatives, right? Falcon Fist is a very good alternative. In fact, it might be better than this in terms of damage, right? Falcon Fist gives you melee attack speed at tier 7. You can slam a tier 7 melee attack speed. It's pretty easy to come with 2 to 3 LP. And then it also comes with like up to +20 melee fire damage. So it's a ton of damage just on the item. But Immortal Vice gives us the armor mitigation applying to damage over time. It gives us the hit damage taken over time, which is incredibly tanky. It also gives us flat health and strength. So it's just the way we want to go. Otherwise, the rest of this build kind of just makes sense. Shattered Chains gives us more melee damage, 20% more damage. It's the way to go. Siphon of Anguish, we needed to apply the Doom for the Shattered Chain, so they are combo. It also gives us move speed, which is nice, but otherwise we don't really care. It's easy to get with 2 LP. I have multiple 3 LP, so there you go. And then Sunwreath, because it gives us increased fire damage, which is important. And then it's easy to come with LP. I have had 4 LPs in the past, and it comes with flat fire damage as well. So those 3 reasons are the reason why we have Sunwreath. And then lastly, the last item, last but not least, Nullportent. This is a great body armor, right? Just in general, it gives you increased health. It gives you Fizz Res. I slammed a tier 7 increased health on there. If you get a 2 LP, of course, double health or like something like health and Rive could be good from the increased damage you could get from it. But double health, I think, would be the way. You could probably get this build. I think I've sacrificed health a lot for more damage, but I think you could easily get this build to 5,000 health if you want to prioritize health. You know, just saying. So if you look at my build, I have capped resistances. I could probably, like, I'm going to cap my poison res. I'm not quite there on void res. I need the idols to make it work, but I'm pretty close, right? Pretty close. And look, I'm missing one of my, there you go, a little bit more health, 4,200 health, right? And then lastly, just run a good pair of Citadel boots. Mine is pretty basic: move speed, strength, cold res, and health. It takes my cold res to the cap of 115, which I need for null portent. And then the move speed just obviously makes melee life feel better. So that is it for the items. Looking at the blessings, what you care about is the armor from the Herot. If you are running that one pair of boots that gives you like up to 105% melee crit multi, then you want this to be physical, what is it called? Physical resistance instead, because that sacks physical res. But otherwise, I like the armor. It's just more well-rounded, better for, you know, corruption pushing. Flat armor from Spirit of Fire. From Corpse Emperor, you want the all res, and then from Raya, you want the crit multi. So pretty basic over there on the blessings. Finally, the passives. So in theory, you could put 40 points in here in the Sentinel passive tree, and you would still be happy. Basically, we want Juggernaut, Armorclad, Time and Faith, and then Gladiator. The Gladiator lets us dual wield, and then we want to get Blade Master for the attack speed, and then we want to get Mail Crusher. At the end, sort of where I'm at when I'm like level 90 plus, you want to get Mail Crusher for that increased damage, because you can get up to 120% increased damage over here, which is huge, right? That's just a lot. That's like a tier 7 fire, right? Just from points. 5 points into Forge Guard for Weapons Master, because it gives you strength, melee attack speed, and more melee damage with a mace. So you get triple dip in here, so it's incredible. And then you want to run Void Knight. You want to go a ton of points into Abyssal Endurance. It gives you all the stats you want. 5 points in Starland Steel. Void Corruption gives you increased crit chance and crit multi per point spent in here, which is why we like putting more points into Abyssal Endurance, right? It's giving us crit multi as well. And then Dark Maw for that increased health. Paladin, this is the weird one. We want Conviction, we want Defiance, we want Valor, we want Blinding Light, because we need some Electrify chance. Then Holy Icon is fine, but we want the Electrify chance for Piety, which gives us more damage to Electrified. And then Faith Armor is nice for the increased armor. We really just need something to get to Holy Precision, right? Which gives us the flat crit chance, which is huge, crit multi and crit chance. And then Righteous Firebrand gives us a ton of melee damage. And then finally, we put points inside of Reverence of Duality. You will notice that we're not putting points inside of Covenant of Dominion, which could give us up to 5% move speed and like 40% increased fire damage. And we're not putting points inside of Covenant of Protection, which could give us up to 40% increased armor, and 10% armor mitigation applies to damage over time. Both of those could be very powerful for the build we're running, but I've opted to pull points out of there to put it into Weapons Master, because it gives a ton of different stats. And then I've opted to put it into Mail Crusher for the 60% increased damage. So note that by not putting it into Covenant of Dominion, I'm losing some move speed, but I'm gaining 20% increased damage. The mana regen doesn't matter from Holy Aura, and the move speed isn't too important because we have a ton of move speed. So the difference isn't too significant, right? Is how I feel about it. Then Covenant of Dominion, it's very tanky, but I have a ton of armor mitigation applying to damage over time with things like my Immortal Vice and True Sight Glass, as well as stuff like Null Portent. The damage reduction from here also applies to damage over time. So I'm pretty tanky in terms of like damage over time reduction, so I don't need it. But if you don't have those 3 things to make it possible, then I would strongly recommend putting points into Covenant of Protection over Mail Crusher. So just the general recommendations. There will be a complete guide in the description below if you want to follow along and you just want something to refer to. Check that out. Okay. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you guys try this out. It's very powerful. Pushing corruption is definitely possible. It's not uber viable, unfortunately, but it is super fun. And the damage is solid, right? We're critting for like 90k once we get ramped up, once we use that Throne of Ambition. I forgot to talk about the idols, but Throne of Ambition, definitely the way to go. Otherwise, just use it to cap your resistances and get as much health as possible. So thanks for watching, guys. Hope you guys are having a wonderful season. Peace.